Hi everyone, and welcome to this video where we continue our series on improving your writing in less than 5 minutes by looking at multi-clause sentences. In the last video we saw the difference between a clause and a phrase. To quickly recap, a clause is a group of words with a subject and a verb, and a phrase is a group of words with a subject or a verb, or neither, but never both. We also saw that the basic unit, the simplest part of a sentence, is the independent clause. It has one subject, one verb, and it makes sense on its own, so you could put a full stop at the end. These are some of the sentences we had as examples in the last video. One of the simplest expressions of an independent clause would be a sentence like this: he ran. You can see the subject in blue and the verb in red. There is just a subject and a verb, but this is still a clause. She laughed. They cried. But sometimes it's necessary to combine clauses and phrases because life's just not that simple. We saw in the last video how when combining a phrase with an independent clause, we need to use commas to separate it from the clause. In this video, we're going to see how to combine independent clauses together, and for this we are going to use coordinating conjunctions. A conjunction is a word that joins two equal clauses together, and a coordinating conjunction is a word that joins two independent clauses together. The good news is that there are only 7 of them, and there's a really easy way to remember them. The acronym for this is fanboys, and this stands for and, nor, but, or, yet, so. There are obviously 2 here that aren't used very much anymore, nor and for. The for here is like because. For example, I reached for my umbrella for it was raining outside. So the for is this one here. Each of these coordinating conjunctions can be found in the middle of what we might previously have called compound sentences. Sentences with 2 independent clauses. 2 clauses that make sense on their own and can stand alone. The quickest and easiest way to see what you're dealing with is to replace the conjunction with a full stop and see if the meaning is still clear and both sentences still make sense. I reached for my umbrella, full stop, it was raining outside. Both sides of that full stop make sense on their own. So a coordinating conjunction is a word that connects 2 independent clauses, but if there are independent clauses that make sense on their own, then that means that there must be dependent clauses that don't make sense on their own. And we call these subordinate clauses. The prefix sub means under or less than. Think of submarine, under the water, or substandard, below the standard expected. So a subordinate clause is not at the same level of an independent clause, and it needs another clause to help it to make sense. For example, I will go to visit my grandmother if I get time off work. I can't go to football training while it's snowing outside. The climate is facing disaster because we are unable to act. In each of these sentences, there's an independent clause and a subordinate clause. We can identify the subordinate clause by finding the subordinating conjunction. We're looking here for the information that wouldn't make sense on its own, that needs an independent clause to help it make sense. In the first, the subordinating conjunction is if. In the second, it's while. And in the third, it's because. The ends of those sentences, if I get time off work, while it's snowing outside, because we are unable to act, are all dependent on what comes before it to make sense. They depend on the independent clause for their meaning. And we can also move them around. This is another trick to working out what's happening in a sentence. In each of these sentences, we can move the subordinate clause around and it still works. So for example, I will go to visit my grandmother if I get time off work can be written like this: if I get time off work, I will go to visit my grandmother. Or alternatively, I will, if I get time off work, go to visit my grandmother. Again, notice the commas. You have to keep clauses, all types, and phrases separate from each other to keep everything neat and tidy and to help your reader understand what is being said. We will find a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of a subordinate clause. There are more subordinating conjunctions than coordinating conjunctions, but some of the most common ones are when, while, despite, because, if, after, once, even though, only, whenever, and many more. So we've seen here the difference between a single clause, an independent clause sentence, and sentences that have more than one clause. But why is it important? Why is it something that we should know? Well, multi-clause sentences are important for a few different reasons. If we could only communicate in single clause sentences, it would limit how we communicate, how well we communicate. Take, for example, the following about social media. Social media is not good. Young people should not use it. It can be good. People could use it. Social media is good for people far away. Social media is bad in school. I think we can all agree that not only is this example bad, it's also rather confusing. There's no nuance, no shades of grey. Language and writing is supposed to communicate how and what you think. Control and mastery over the language you use is crucial to getting your message across. Now, look at the previous example written using conjunctions and multiple clauses. Social media is often depicted as a bad thing. We are told that young people should never use it, but it's not that simple. It can be a force for good. If you live miles and miles from your family and loved ones, then social media is the thing that brings people together. And what could be bad about that? The only drawback, perhaps, is where students, unable to switch off from the effects of social media, allow it to affect their work and school. But there are ways around this. It's not the fault of social media itself. Now, as you can see, there is much more variation in meaning here. There is an acknowledgement that there are perhaps issues around social media, but it's not all bad. This is a very difficult point to communicate if we can only use independent clauses separated by full stops. In creative or descriptive writing too, we need to include clauses and phrases. Take, for example, the following sentence. At the top of the house, in the small, dusty attic, behind the old clothes and Christmas decorations, an old box, undisturbed for years, held a secret that would destroy an entire family. As you can see, there is one clause in this sentence. An old box held a secret. There is one subject, the box, and there is one verb, held. Everything else is phrases, and they are used for other reasons, such as setting the scene, for developing drama or tension, and engaging the reader. So in this video, we've looked at multi-clause sentences, how they are constructed, and why we use them. Remember, two independent clauses are connected using a coordinating conjunction. There are 7 of those, and we remember them by the acronym FANBOYS. A subordinate clause cannot make sense on its own and has a subordinating conjunction at the beginning of it that makes it dependent on the main clause. We need multi-clause sentences to help us convey layers of meaning or shades of grey, and in creative writing to entertain and interest the reader. I hope that you found this video useful and enjoyed it. To all of you who have subscribed so far, thank you very much. And if you haven't, please do. Leave a comment, like, and come back for the next video in the series where we're going to look at some common mistakes in writing, including the dreaded comma splice.